Imagine your shock back in 1937. You're finally rich enough to buy yourself a Rolls-Royce. You're paying that astronomical price, and then you discover you don't get any seats with that. Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution here once again at the Martin Auto Museum. You know, this is a great collection here in Phoenix with more than 180 cars, each one with an interesting story behind it. And this particular Rolls-Royce beside me probably raises more questions than I have answers for, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, make sure you like and subscribe, and of course in the comments down below, let me know what I got right and what I got wrong. There's always something I got wrong, and you Rolls-Royce people out there can help me with that. And I want to know this week, what's the most luxurious car you've ever gotten a ride in? Was it a Rolls-Royce like this? How about a Bentley or a Maybach? Was it a limo that you rented or a car your family owned? Let me know. Now it's time to turn our attention to this 1937 Rolls-Royce. This is what's called a 2530. Now, back in 37, Rolls was really making two models, the Phantom and the 2530. All right, but before I really get into this car, I need to give some history about Rolls-Royce. The Rolls-Royce story begins in 1904 when engineer Henry Royce is introduced to car salesman Charles Rolls. Royce was a fanatic for details. Rolls, also a trained engineer, loved cars and aviation and just happened to have a family fortune behind him. Their first car was the Rolls-Royce 10 HP, but in 1906, they created the car that would define both the company and the standard of luxury for years to come, the Silver Ghost. Initially, it was called the 4050, and it was declared the best car in the world. The Ghost had a solid 20-year run. But not all of them were built in the UK. Believe it or not, Rolls opened a factory in Springfield, Massachusetts, and for a time built cars in the United States for those US customers. Their next car was the 20, a smaller Rolls-Royce designed to appeal to owners who actually wanted to drive themselves. The Phantom came along in 1925, reinforcing the Rolls-Royce standard of unparalleled engineering, legendary quiet running, and exceptional reliability. All at a price, of course. In 1929, the 2025 replaced the older 20 model. Which brings us to this car, the 2530. You see, while the 2025 was a big seller, buyers had one big complaint. It didn't have enough power. Which leads us to the interesting part about Rolls-Royce back in those days. You see, they did not sell complete cars. Every Rolls-Royce built was a rolling chassis. You got the frame, you got the suspension, you got the engine and the cowl, and of course, you got this imposing Rolls-Royce grille, but you didn't get a body. For that, you not only had to pay extra, but you had to find your own company to build it. Coach builders like Park Ward, Barker, Mulliner, or Thrupp and Maberly were very happy to supply the passenger compartment for, well, a modest fee that was almost as much as the chassis sometimes. Think about this. You just spent $5,000 to $7,000, and back then, that was a lot of money for a rolling chassis. And then the coach builder wanted an additional $3,000 to $5,000 to turn it into a functioning automobile. Of course, it was a Rolls-Royce, which meant you were already rich. So, what's a few $1,000s more if you want a nice body? But this is where the power problem comes in. A lot of those coach builders made luxurious bodies that were pretty heavy. The result was, well, a slow car. In fact, Henry Royce was really annoyed with that back then. So he decided to fix the problem. When the 2530 came out, the horsepower bumped from 67 up to 115 horses, and it worked. Over the next few years, Rolls sold more than 1,200 2530s, and those were pretty solid numbers for a luxury car maker during the Depression. All right, let's talk about this engine that's in this Rolls-Royce. It's an inline six-cylinder. Now, this engine came out in 1936. The previous six-cylinder, using the 2520, was 3.7 liters. This one is 4.3 liters, more than 15% larger. And they did it by enlarging the bore of the piston, the width, as you want to call it. The stroke, the up and down motion, that stayed the same for this motor. This engine has the same overhead valve layout that carried over from the previous engine. Overhead valves, actually the original patents go back to 1896, but it's Buick that was first credited with the first production overhead valve with their 1904 Model B. Chevy's six-cylinder overhead valve came out in 1929. That kind of revolutionized the big production world. But Rolls had been using it for 7 years before that. They started this in 1922. Another big change with this engine was the fact that Rolls switched from their own carburetor to a Stromberg unit. Now, it was only for this engine, but it was a company that was making them for them. As I mentioned, this engine makes about 115 horsepower, but importantly, it has more torque, more enjoyable to drive because it's got more get up and go. Of course, another big selling point for this Rolls-Royce engine was the fact that it was both quiet and smooth. Those are really good qualities for someone in the back who's spending an awful lot of money for a luxury car. By the way, I have to mention that Rolls-Royce has a long history with airplane engines as well. They made a V12 during World War I, and of course, there's that legendary 27-liter Merlin engine that powered the Spitfire and the Hurricane fighter planes during World War II. And these days, still making engines. In fact, it's the 4th largest maker of commercial aircraft engines in the world. The ones they make today, though, are just a tad more sophisticated than this 1937 six-cylinder. Let's walk around and take a look at the styling of our 1937 Rolls-Royce 2530. I'll talk about the Spirit of Ecstasy in just a moment, that hood ornament that sits atop this very imposing grille. And of course, this grille has been really copied by an awful lot of car companies over the years that wanted to give their cars, well, the impression that they were just like a Rolls-Royce. But there really is only one Rolls-Royce grille that's been had on Rolls-Royces for an awful long time. Now, I mentioned the fact that there were 2 different cars being built by Rolls-Royce in 1937. There was the Phantom and then this one, the 2530. Now, this one was designed to be smaller. It's about 10 inches shorter, and it's about 6 inches narrower than the Phantom. And the reason being was that for a driver trying to drive around through the streets of London, this was actually a little more maneuverable, less of a country car with all the extra space, and more of a car that someone could maneuver through the traffic of London, which was very important. This is the trunk. You can see it's not an awfully large trunk back here. The reality is if you were probably going to go driving out to your manor out in the country, you were going to have a separate trunk mounted on the back with your goodies, or better yet, just have someone in a separate vehicle carrying your things for you. This has a 132-inch wheelbase. The previous model started off, I think, at 129 inches, so they'd stretched it over time to this length. Now, this is the limousine body. I mentioned that all the bodies were customs, and you could get a wide variety of different body styles. There were 2 doors, 4 doors, coupes. They had something called a sedanka. The sedanka actually had this portion not built over the driver. The driver was exposed. To be honest with you, I never really fully understood that. The passenger was enclosed, but the driver was exposed to the element. Didn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, I also mentioned the fact that there were a lot of different manufacturers that were making bodies for Rolls-Royce. And what we don't know here at the museum, and this is where I can use some help from you, we don't know who made this body. I haven't been able to find any type of a nameplate on it. So as a result, we don't know. Is this a Park Ward? Is it a Mulliner? Is it a Thrupp? Is it a Barker? We don't know the answer to that. I'm hoping that some Rolls-Royce expert out there is going to know the answer to that, and maybe you can fill us in. I've been looking and trying to figure out if there's any particular clues, but to be honest with you, so many of the body styles were very similar in the way that they were designed, with the same kind of cut back here. But if there's something on this that you see and it's something that indicates it's either, like say a Park Ward or a Mulliner, please let us know. By the way, I love these things, trafficators, semaphores, whatever you want to call them. They're mechanically actuated. They would actually flip up as turn signals to let somebody know that you were turning. Big, long beast of a car overall. And one of the things I like is the fact that look how far forward the front wheels are. I mean, it is extending right underneath the grille. So many modern cars, you have a lot of overhang in front of the wheels. For this car, you don't. Now, one downside to this car is that the passengers in the back seat are sitting right over the rear wheel. It wasn't until other cars came along and began to move those seats forward in the back. And the problem is that as the rear wheel is bouncing over ruts and rocks and everything else, you're getting the full force of it. That's assuming, of course, you're in something other than, the best car on the planet, a Rolls-Royce, with probably the best suspension and the best springing. But even then, I'm still saying you're probably going to get a bit of a jarring action because you're sitting right on top of the rear axle. So once again, our 1937 Rolls-Royce, but the question I need your help with is, what kind of body do you think this is? Is it a Thrupp? Is it a Mulliner, a Barker, a Park? We don't know, but if you have the answer, let us know in the comments down below. We have to take a moment to talk about the famed Spirit of Ecstasy, the hood ornament that has graced Rolls-Royces since it was introduced in 1911. Now, popular legend has it that the tiny statue was modeled after a young lady named Eleanor Thornton. Artist Charles Sykes had done a hood ornament called the Whisper, and that was supposedly used as the inspiration for the Spirit of Ecstasy, and she was the model, supposedly, for the Whisper. And the Spirit of Ecstasy, well, that's a graceful goddess who chose traveling by road as her supreme delight. Miss Thornton, though, led a somewhat sordid and tragic life. She actually died in 1915, right before World War I, when the SS Persia was struck. She was on board and died when it sank. But if she is indeed the inspiration for this, well, she truly had a beautiful face. And to be honest with you, if you do more research about Eleanor Thornton, I'm surprised no one's made a movie about her yet. Let's begin our tour of the interior with what I will call the servants' quarters. This is where the chauffeur would be driving the folks who paid the bills in the back around. Because once again, this was not a car that was designed for an owner to drive. This was a limousine. You were to be driven in. And I will say also that this is a difficult car to get into from the driver's side. I'm going to guess most chauffeurs were probably getting in on that side and sliding over. The reason being is we've got the brake and we've got the shifter, and they're right here, right where your feet would want to be coming in. So when you're trying to climb in, I don't think I'm going to completely do it. I'll just leave my one leg out because it's so difficult to climb in. Once you're inside, the seat is comfortable, but the seating position, not so much. Very upright, great big huge steering wheel. There was no power steering back then. So you really needed a big steering wheel like this to be able to muscle the front wheels around where you wanted it to go. These were our turn signals, very forward thinking for the day. Nice collection of gauges. I love the fact that it says petrol right there. Speedometer in the center. Everything you needed nice and close at hand, including your ashtray. They did have a form of air conditioning for the driver. When I say air conditioning, I use that term loosely. You had the ability to pop the window out and allow the air to come in. But I will point out that the windshield wipers are down below here. If the windshield wipers were up, you had a hard time popping that out. What you really weren't going to do when you were up here in the servants' quarters, the chauffeur's area, was listen in on the folks in the back. That's because you had a glass partition separating the driver from the folks in the back. And some people even went so far as to put blinds up. Heaven forbid you should see what was going on back there. All right, and speaking of back there, this is where the money was spent. Unfortunately, our car here at the museum is a little on the tattered side. Its former glory has faded, but this is where the extremely rich owner of this fine automobile would have sat. Now, in addition to having very comfortable seats, this section would often have a lot of little extras. You know, it might have a fold-down tray, special armrests, footrests, storage cabinets, all integrated into the coachwork. Walnut veneer or burl wood trim decorating the surfaces. And you'd have clocks, smokers' kits, mirrors. I mean, after all, you were having a custom coach-built car. You could get pretty much whatever you wanted, in whatever style you wanted. Now, what we don't know here at the museum is the history of this particular car. We don't know the name of the extremely wealthy first owner. All we know is they had a hefty bank account and expensive taste. I mean, think about it though. If you were rich and it was the 1930s, would you want anything other than the best car in the world? Incidentally, I should mention an interesting and slightly tragic note about Charles Rolls. While his name is synonymous with luxury cars, he also holds a somewhat dark place in British aviation history. You see, just a few weeks after becoming the first man to fly solo across the English Channel and back, Charles also became the first recorded powered aircraft fatality in Britain. It happened in 1910. He was piloting a Wright Flyer and crashed. He was only 34 years old. The 2530 was built for 3 years, from 1936 to 1938. This car was effectively replaced by the Rolls-Royce Wraith, which was introduced in 1938. But in late 1939, Britain declared war against Germany. Car production stopped. Rolls then focused on making those airplane engines needed to win the war. Once the World War II was over, well, Rolls got back to building cars, their first models appearing in 1946 with that silver Wraith. Their first real post-war design, though, was the Silver Dawn. That came along in 1949. And today, of course, the name Rolls-Royce stands for the ultimate in luxury, expensive and exclusive. And just like it was in 1937, it's a company that does not care about expanding its market for luxury cars for the masses. It focuses on the fortunate few that have lots of money.